Hey everybody.
Hey, Patrick.
Thanks for stepping up, Todd, and being our presenter tonight. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's didn't get as much time as I wanted to, but oh well. Let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Man, I felt so terrible today. I went ahead and did the mock for next week,
Yeah.
excuse me, or this week,
Yeah.
and I did really good experimental design. So I used that confidence. And I went ahead and rocked out the next week since she already put it in there.
Uh-huh.
Sunk it up on punishment and reinforcement, and I keep thinking that I know that, but I think it's the all the deep stuff with indiscriminate extinction and all that.
Yeah.
I know I'm gonna get it. I know I will.
Yeah. Yeah. So you did the IOA mock too?
I did. I worked on it,
Okay.
but the pretty much just went through it, and I went through the stuff that my supervisor had for the tackle the task. Let's tackle the task. I can't tongue twister.
Yeah.
That part, and then but I felt pretty good though. I'm really glad we broke it down this week and did all that stuff because it really helped me out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just got the phone with my son. He had some homework problems and wanted me to work it through.
How old is he?
9 years old.
Oh, cool. So he's like fourth grade?
Third grade.
Third grade, yeah.
At least I could help him out because that's the year I taught the most.
Mm-hmm.
I did third grade for 5 years before I moved to special ed. I loved
Cool.
it.
Yeah, I like that grade. I like working with third grade.
I started the PFA SPT training with Hanley yesterday. I got
Okay.
approved for it at work. The AR behavior specialists were going to do it together. And I was going to do it, but I didn't want to do it without my supervisor's blessing because she's training me in the FBA. And I didn't want to, just say, I'm going to do this and this is great. So when she invited me to do the process, I was pretty pumped.
Cool. Cool.
It's a game changer.
Yeah. Got about a minute. Make sure.
How's your week going?
Mine's going pretty good. Kind of really busy with everything's happening all at once, sort of, but it's going good. Yeah.
It's good to be busy. Helps the week go fast.
Yeah, it does. See a few more people coming in. It's 8 o'clock. You usually start on time?
I should wait a few minutes because
Okay.
usually I have a bunch of stragglers.
Okay.
Yeah, Emerson was asked. All right. Cooper, chapter 1. I was typing so fast, didn't even realize what I put on the Facebook thing. Whenever you're ready, I guess.
Okay.
Just had to have some stragglers.
All right. So let's start. All right. So we're going to do chapter 15 from Cooper. Punishment by removal of stimulus and or negative punishment. And just a heads up, I am going to use the PowerPoint, most of the PowerPoint slides that were provided on the second edition, Why Reinvent the Wheel? And you'll see that down on the bottom left-hand corner. So that's where I got most of my material because it is chapter 15 from Cooper. So the definition of punishment by removal of stimulus. Stimulus removed, contingent upon a response that decreases the future probability of that response. The future decrease in the response is a critical feature in defining punishment. So what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to go over a few definitions. Then I'm going to talk about some little applications, some concepts that may be kind of tricky, try to help discriminate between those, and then go through kind of quickly what each negative reinforcement and punishment, and the exclusionary timeout and things like that, response cost, go over those pretty quickly. So that's kind of like what we're going to do tonight. And so we have a definition. Oh, that jumped ahead here a little bit. Okay, well, punisher, a stimulus change which produces a decrease in behavior when it immediately follows response, immediately applies in punishment just as it does in reinforcement. But I want to go over the stimulus and environment first in that definition. So a stimulus is a physical event that affects the behavior of an individual, and it can be external or internal. Radical behaviorism is about private events. It's what separated B.F. Skinner from everyone else back in the day. Environment is a complex dynamic universe of events, and as we know, behavior does not happen in a vacuum. So just going over some of those definitions, and then we're told in the code, section 304, to use less technical language. So, and under like explaining assessment results, or if we were to explain a procedure to a family, one possible way would say negative punishment involves taking something good or desirable way to reduce the occurrence of a particular behavior. So then I started thinking about, well, what's the difference between negative punishment and negative reinforcement? And so both, discriminating here using green, they both take away, but with negative punishment, it's something good or desirable, whereas negative reinforcement is something bad and undesirable. And with negative punishment, it decreases behavior. So negative reinforcement, it increases behavior. So just kind of discriminating between these two concepts. Punishment by contingent removal of a stimulus. Again, last week, we talked about type 1, which is positive punishment. Stimulus applied, both is behavior reduced. Stimulus removed in negative punishment, type 2 negative punishment. So when we started talking about type 2 negative punishment, I thought, oh, what are the AKAs for negative punishment? So we got type 2 punishment, penalty principle, and penalty contingency. Something we may need to know for the exam. In Cooper book, he talked about this study from Weston Smith, 2002, which I found interesting because I tried to do it back in the day. And in the study, they wanted to reduce the noise in the cafeteria. So they brought in like a traffic light apparatus where it was green, yellow, or orange, and red. And when the noise, the volume got too loud, then the traffic light would go to a red, signaling that the volume was too loud, and that what they would do would they turn off the music, loss of music. And so the volume of the noise of the students went down after they turned off the music, and then they turned the music back on. Now, I tried the same thing in our cafeteria back in like 2003 or so. I think I remember reading this study or something. We got a traffic light, and um, when the noise got too loud, traffic light went on red, and they lost the music, and it wasn't effective. And I didn't know about EOs back then, but the music did not establish an effectiveness of any of the punishment, which is, what Cooper talks about. There's, the loss of music has to be connected with the music. So the SR here, negative, and the EO, I think of being connected. That's why I put the music here. So if there is no, deprivation of the music caused by turning it off, because it wasn't their style of music or whatever, then this routine did not work, and it did not work. And so we ended up using actually positive punishment by blowing a whistle, and that wasn't very effective either. Okay, so negative effects of punishment include punishing can be reinforcing for the instructors. Sometimes they call it the negative reinforcement cycle, where a student wants to be sent out of the classroom. So the teacher acts up. The teacher, removes the student from the classroom. And then the student leaves, doesn't have to do the work, and they're either sent to the principal or sent out in the hallway. So that's something that we have to be careful when we start talking about timeout. Appropriate behaviors may decrease, could be an increase in other undesirable behaviors, behavioral contrast, or emotional outbursts. So let's look at behavioral contrast a little bit. So behavioral contrast is a change in the rate of behaviors in the opposite direction, either increase or decrease, due to a change in the schedule of reinforcement or punishment. In this case, we're talking about punishment. So for punishment is an increase in undesirable behaviors in a setting where it is not punished. So why does this happen? So I remember reading about this happens due to multiple schedule reinforcement. So in change in punishment and reinforcement, there's a change in the density of one component of the schedule. So Cooper talks about in the book that in the pigeon example, there's a blue key, and the pigeon pecks on it, does not get any whatever the item is. And with the green key, it does. And so it stops pecking at the blue key and increases the rate of the green key. And so then Cooper starts to use an example, more of a hypothetical situation of a grandma. So a child is eating cookies before dinner, and it eats the cookies in the presence or the absence of the grandmother, doesn't matter. And then the grandmother yells at the kiddo. And so it ends up having, he doesn't eat the cookies in the presence, but then increases eating in the absence of the grandmother. So that's two examples of behavioral contrast. And then when I was putting the presentation together, I was thinking about ethical concerns. So with the code in section 408, considerations regarding punishment procedures. A, behavior analysts recommend reinforcement rather than punishment whenever possible. B, if punishment procedures are necessary, behavior analysts always include reinforcement procedures for alternative behavior in the behavior change program. And also C, before implementing punishment-based procedures, behavior analysts ensure that appropriate steps have been taken to implement reinforcement-based procedures, unless the severity of the dangerousness of the behavior necessitates immediate use of aversive procedures. D, behavior analysts ensure that aversive procedures are accompanied by an increased level of training, supervision, oversight. Behavior analysts must evaluate the effectiveness of aversive procedures in a timely manner and modify the behavior change program. If it is ineffective, behavior analysts always include a plan to discontinue the use of aversive procedures when no longer needed. So in summary, to use punishment appropriately, use a punisher with significant magnitude, use reinforcement interventions as well, use the least restrictive intervention that can be effective. We talked about this a little bit last week, where Penny was talking about do not use a mild punisher and then increase the magnitude if needed. And I gave that a little bit more thought, and I thought about habituation and adaptation to aversive stimuli. What would happen was to be overuse of a punisher and can reduce the suppressive effect of the stimuli, which made me start thinking about habituation and adaptation. So remember, habituation is respondent, adaptation is operant. Habituation talks about reflexes that weaken over time, and adaptation is learned behaviors that weaken over time. So for example, when I was trying to think of an example of habituation, I have a sty in my eye, which is clearing up. I tend to get them every 2 years or so. And the first time when I was supposed to put the antibiotic ointment in the eyelid, of course I blinked. And then it was like a little bit more dead the second time I blinked. And then now that I'm on my 5th and final day to put the antibiotic in the sty, in the eye, there's the blinking has reduced as far as frequency, and I'm able to do it the first time without having to blink. With adaptation, I think of it as a funny joke after a while as not as funny. And tell a joke maybe a couple times and then it may not be funny. But I have this video that is pretty funny for me. It depends on what you think is funny. So I'm going to play this. This is called The Dramatic Squirrel. So I've been watching this video on and off for like the last 12 years. I still think it's funny. Do I laugh as much as I do over the first time? No, but it still brings a smile. But I thought I'd just give you an example here. Okay, so we are going to go to the types of negative punishment. So let's go to response cost first, and there's 2 types: response cost. With response cost, we have bonus response cost and direct fines. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So with the response costs, loss of specific amount of reinforcement contingent on a behavior. With bonus response costs, you add a non-contingent reinforcer, then take them away. And this is the preferred method. So the example is like, let's say the students get 15 minutes of recess and you say, I'm going to add on like 10 minutes of recess. And then you take away that 10 minutes, for like let's say for every challenging behavior or acting out behavior, you take a minute off. And it could come down to like you lose all 10 minutes, you could lose 14 minutes or whatever. But the way I think of it is like you're adding on the non-contingent reinforcers and then you take away. Whereas direct fines, it's the direct loss of positive reinforcers. So in this next example, here is an example, and we'll give an active student response here. Child has 15 minutes of recess on their regular schedule every morning. Adult says, let's open our books to page 12. Each of you should read the first paragraph to your buddy. A child pokes his buddy and 5 minutes of recess time is removed. And the result is poking buddy occurs less often in the future when the teacher gives a classroom instruction in recess. So if you don't mind, just put in the chat, is this a bonus response cost or a direct fine response cost? Where they have 15 minutes of recess on a schedule. So I cannot see actually the chat.
But most of them are saying direct fines.
Direct fines, yep, good. Okay, thank you. Awesome. All right. Desirable aspects of response costs. It can produce rapid decreases in target behavior. It's convenient, easy to implement, and can be incorporated in existing tokens or allowance programs, or contingencies you already have in place, and is easy combined with other approaches such as DRO, or differential reinforcement. So fines is denying access to food and free time, and it can be unethical or undesirable. For example, you don't want to deny a student food for too long. Like if school ends at 2, you wouldn't give them, deny the access to food until 1:55 p.m., and then also obtain permission from human rights review committees, especially for the more extreme types of punishment. So, combined with positive reinforcement, you can combine with point and token programs, again, differential reinforcement. So the advantages if you do that, you got her, Patrick, thank you. Advantage, if all points or tokens are not lost, they can be exchanged for backup reinforcers. The use of reinforcers reduce the legal and ethical concerns. Combining with group contingencies, a contingent upon any member of a group, the entire group loses a specific amount of reinforcement. What kind of, think of that, we can do an ASR here. It's a contingent upon any member of a group. What would that be? Dependent, independent, or interdependent? If you want to just type that into the chat. Dependent, independent, or interdependent, any member, individual of a group. What are most people saying?
They're saying dependent.
Dependent, yes, the hero method, so. Yeah. All right, effective use of response costs, specifically define the target behaviors that will result in response costs. Cooper gives an example about the father telling the 2 boys, who are fighting, he tells them that if they argue, they get, some kind of response cost. I forget exactly what it was, but it was during dinner, at the table, or coming to the table, and so that was a good example of having all these contingencies in place and specific target behaviors, the rules, and the fines and associated. And then he talks about bankrupt, where you don't want to use response costs too much so that they don't have any type of chance to have any reinforcers that they can exchange for a generalized condition reinforcer, which is what most is used in these response costs. So fines, again, like reinforcement, should be posed immediately. Response costs versus bonus response costs, use a least aversive initially. So bonus response cost, it increases the susceptibility and decreases emotional outburst. So that's why Cooper says it's a preferred method over the direct fines. And again, ensure there's a decrease of likelihood in bankruptcy. And then be prepared for unplanned or unexpected outcomes. The response costs can reinforce rather than punish undesirable behaviors. Individuals can refuse to give up positive reinforcers. Cooper talks about that. Avoid the overuse of it, and keep records to evaluate its effectiveness. Considerations for response costs. Increased ingression may occur. So talks about you can ignore, put on the emotional outburst when possible, if it is, or ride the storm out. That's kind of difficult in the setting that I work in. Avoidance of the person who administers response costs or the setting may occur. So these become conditioned aversive stimuli. Make sure positive reinforcement is available for appropriate behavior to reduce the likelihood of the outcome. More considerations, collateral reductions of desirable behaviors may occur. Response costs may unintentionally suppress other desirable behaviors as well as the targeted problem behaviors. Response costs calls attention to inappropriate behaviors rather than appropriate behaviors, and be prepared for unpredictability. So we'll go to now timeout procedures. And so I think of timeout, and then I think of non-exclusion on one category and then exclusion on another. So with non-exclusion, you have planned ignoring, withdrawal of a specific positive reinforcer, contingent observation, and timeout ribbon. And exclusion, you have the timeout from room, partition timeout, and hallway timeout. So this is the way I kind of organized it. So you have non-exclusionary timeout. The way I was taught is to remember these is IWO, wore a ribbon. So you have planned ignoring, withdrawal of specific reinforcers, contingent observation, and the timeout ribbon. So I wore a ribbon. So a non-exclusion timeout, the individual is not completely removed physically from the time-in setting. However, position within the environment may shift. So with planned ignoring, that's the first one, is the social reinforcers, usually attention or physical contact or verbal interaction, are removed for a brief period. And planned ignoring is non-intrusive, quick, and convenient. So then I start thinking, what is the difference between planned ignoring versus extinction? So with planned ignoring, you lose something that you did not have access to. With extinction, you do have access to. So for example, with losing something you had access to and you don't have anymore, let's say if this ever happened that you did so many tweets or misused Twitter or Facebook that you were actually removed from Facebook, Twitter, or not being able to do any tweets, that that privilege has been taken away. Whereas extinction, you have the access, so you're still on Facebook, you're still on Twitter, but you are posting all these pictures on about yourself or whatever, and no one likes it, no one gives a thumbs up, or no one gives any love to your. So you still posting, you still have access to the Facebook, but no one is giving you any attention in the form of likes, thumbs up, or heart face.
Todd,
Yes.
can I add on to that? Because
Yes, please.
it's one of the things I see so many discussions about. So can you go back a slide? Planned
Yes.
ignoring versus extinction. So with planned ignoring, we are ignoring everything about the learner. Whereas with extinction, it is the removal of previously reinforced. Wait a minute, I now got stuck in my sentence. Discontinuation of a previously reinforced response. So with planned ignoring, say I'm working in a school setting and I've decided I'm going to use planned ignoring. So planned ignoring, first of all, is always on a time-based schedule. So I'm going to, thank you, Patrick, withholding reinforcement. So I'm going to decide, okay, for 5 minutes, I'm going to ignore Johnny. That means I ignore everything about Johnny. I also ignore all the goodness that Johnny's doing. So Johnny might have, in the meantime, in a very appropriate way, mandate for water. He might have said something else very appropriately, but I'm ignoring all of that. Whereas with extinction, I'm discontinuing reinforcement of one response. So say, for example, Johnny smacks to gain access to an iPad. I will discontinue reinforcement for that. But if Johnny then asks for water, I'm going to say, sure, Johnny, here you have some water. In the meantime, I'm also going to say, Johnny, love your sweater. And I am going to give him a whole bunch of attention, but just not the smacking for the iPad. That's a very different thing to planned ignoring, whereas with planned ignoring, I'm just ignoring everything about Johnny for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever the time interval is.
That's a great distinction. Yes. Thank you. All right. Then second is we have withdrawal of a specific positive reinforcer. So some sort of positive reinforcer that's already present is removed for a brief period of time contingent upon a target behavior and then reinstated. It can be implemented as a group contingency like Cooper mentions, the good behavior game. And later versions of the good behavior game have investigated the use of positive spin on, so instead of in the good behavior game, if you see an inappropriate behavior and you put a check mark for that group, you give a tally for inappropriate behavior, you put a positive spin on it, and you put a check mark for the positive behaviors that you see. And then contingent observation, the individual is repositioned within the existing setting. And I think of this as the dunce corner, where, you know, back in the day, they would sit in the corner and they'd have a hat and it says dunce on it. So the observation is ongoing, and it's, but they cannot participate. Timeout ribbon, so that's where the color band is placed on the child's wrist and is discriminated for receiving reinforcement. Ribbon on, child earns reinforcement. Ribbon off, child cannot earn reinforcement. You can also put the reinforcement, the ribbon, up on the board, or, you know, it doesn't have to be exactly the ribbon. It could be a picture of a ribbon projected on the projector or something like that. Knowing that, you know, for the whole class, if you're going to do it, you can have reinforcer when the ribbon is projected. The contingent upon the target behavior, the color band is removed for a specific period of time. So all social interactions terminated. Other reinforcers are also withheld. So timeout. Also, let's move to timeout, AKA also known as timeout from positive reinforcement. So it's the withdrawal of the opportunity to earn positive reinforcement, or the loss of access to reinforcers for a specific period of time, contingent upon the occurrence of a target behavior. If the effect of these is to decrease the future probability of the behavior, then the procedure has functioned as a punisher for the behavior. And the big question is if. Important aspects of timeout: the discrepancy between timeout and time in must be great. The loss of access to reinforcement must be contingent upon a target behavior. There is a resultant decrease in the future probability of the behavior. Otherwise, it is likely not timeout for the reinforcement, because the EO that preceded the behavior was not a reinforcing time in environment. So we talked about earlier in that chart where you had the EO, and then you had the SD behavior, and then the punishment procedure. Then you have exclusion timeout. The individual is removed physically from the environment for a specific period of time. And, you know, it's always specific period of time, and it's in contingent upon the occurrence of a target behavior. So there's a timeout room. And within exclusion timeout, you could have separated by partition and placed in a hallway. So the timeout room, we all know timeout rooms, confined space, is devoid of any positive reinforcers, really not furnished at all. Especially, you know, if you put a student with aggressive behavior, you put them in a room with a desk or something, they could throw it against the wall or whatever, or even, you know, hit the wall or whatever, so even if there's no furniture. So it has to be safe, adequate heat and light, and be secure but not locked, and temporarily, and near the time in setting. So we make sure that our timeout room is not too far from any particular classroom. Advantages of the timeout room: an opportunity to acquire reinforcement is eliminated or reduced substantially. After a few exposures, students learn to discriminate from other rooms, making the time in setting more desirable. Decreases risk of student hurting other students within the, you know, like the initial setting, like the classroom. Disadvantages of timeout room: you have to escort the student, and that can cause a lot of aggressive behavior, escalate the behavior, may result in resistance of emotional outbursts. Access to ongoing instructions prohibited, loss of instruction time, and then individuals may engage in self-injury in the timeout room that may, you know, that should be stopped, but may go undetected. And then obviously, like, negative public perception. And then we keep track of how many instances of timeout is being used.
Can I say something, Todd?
What's that?
Can I say something on the timeout thing?
Yeah.
I know I hate to say it, but, you know, I'm a timeout somewhat fan, but I'm starting to see the light. I'm getting better. So But I don't like timeout rooms so much, and I don't like timeout in hallways. And timeout in hallways always got me when I was a teacher. Was we're gonna put Johnny in the hallway, and who's watching Johnny?
Mhm.
Johnny's in the hallway, so Johnny's now has free access to whatever's in the hallway.
Yeah.
So there's a safety issue there. In the room, if you have to move Johnny to the safe room, you have to move Johnny to the timeout room, you're going to have a lot of ongoing because at this point, we probably escalated his behavior and we've probably raised it up. So it's going to be more of a challenge
Yes.
versus the in the setting. If we're going to do timeout, time in the setting, then we're going to have it right here.
Yeah.
Because I don't teach my teachers to take it somewhere else or even in a classroom, take it across a classroom. We deal with the situation when it happens.
Right.
It's been easier. It's handled better. It gets over in and out because they lost access to something. They want access back to it, and then we handle it, and then we go back.
Right.
Sorry, just my little soapbox.
No, I definitely get that. And, you know, one alternative is you can do partition timeout within the classroom, you know, have the partition as if it's, you know, big enough to put in the corner of the room. Student goes in that partition, and then the rest of the classroom can be removed and go to another room or take a break or the bathroom break or whatever. That's another, yeah, but I'm there with you, right? So that's the partition timeout right there that we talked about. So yeah, anecdotally, it's hard to right here. The disadvantage may still be able to obtain covert reinforcement. You know, it's really hard when they're in the partition. You know, to get any kind of attention. You know, they may just look at you, or they could spit on you, or there's a lot of things that could happen if in the partition timeout too. That's someone's okay. And then hallway timeout, as you said, there's a lot of not highly recommended. They can have access to whatever's out in the hallway as reinforcement. In the setting I work, there's no way we could put someone in a hallway timeout because of elopement. And so that is not a possibility at all.
It's just funny because like I had a teacher say that one of my clients was a runner, and I'm like, really? He's a runner? But when I observed you let him go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
You trusted him by himself.
Yeah.
So it's just like, oh, you're not really. He's not really running.
Yeah. Yeah. Because runners will run. Yep.
Runners run.
Yeah, they run. Yeah. So there are a few desirable aspects of timeout. I'm not going to go through this too much because, you know, just personally, I'm not into punishment. I'm more into positive reinforcement and doing antecedent interventions. But you know, the slide will be available, and when there's effective use, reinforce and enrich the timeout environment. Clearly define the behaviors leading to timeout, and, you know, process it with the student. One of the things I do with the timeout is I've noticed that students may not be calm by the time they use timeout. So, you know, we have to use some signals from the body. The breath is calm. I teach the kids interoception skills, body awareness skills, touch your heart. Is it beating fast or is it beating slow? Just things like that. And that to me is the signal that they can come out of a timeout. Okay. And so especially with students who are maybe on more of the moderate to intense, they may not notice that their heart is beating really fast. And that means that they are, they're not calm yet. So, and then the whole idea of effective use of the idea of time, you know, it shouldn't be more than like 15 minutes, or if something's probably happening if it's longer. I mean, it can take longer, but the standard is to try to go for 15 minutes and define exit criteria. That's why I was talking about the heart, that's personally one of the things I like to use. And let's see what else here. Yeah, there's exclusion versus non-exclusion timeout. And so every school is different, how they use it. If there's appropriate space, explain the timeout rules, the target behaviors, duration, exit criteria, obtain permission. It's like when we're using punishment and or extinction, we tell the student this is what we're doing. So apply consistently, evaluate effectiveness, consider other options, and then consider legal and ethical issues. So that is all I have for tonight.
Well, Todd, I think you did an amazing job, and I'm just so excited. And I learned a lot of information from you tonight. But one of the things that impressed me most was your ability to try something that's in the literature and recognize that it did or didn't work, and look for a solution to the problem to further it. So many of us are shy away from the literature, and so many of us, even shying away from it, wouldn't dare try it on our own. So I think that's really, really, really courageous of you, courageous to share that with us. And I thought your presentation was wonderful. It was colorful. It was eye-catching. It was attentive. You were spot on. You recognized and respected our time. And I'm pretty proud of you, Todd.
Wow, thank you. That makes me feel good. Thanks a lot.
Well, there you go, Todd. Nothing can beat that.
That's a big compliment right there.
Yeah, so it was a
presentation, Todd.
beautiful presentation, Todd. Very nice and calm, but I'm sorry, I can't beat Belinda. Those were beautiful words from Belinda.
Well, it wasn't a competition, but goodness, I sit in a lot of these presentations, and I just think to myself, sometimes I know that our staff meds are all supposed to be in the same color, but goodness, every now and then some visual stimulation might help us a little bit. And I think the B and the C and the B and the A and our title ought to be in all different colors. So I applaud Todd for stepping out of that SAF Med standard and giving us a little enlightenment there. So hey, I haven't done this, so I can't judge, but look pretty good to me.
Thank you.
Well, talking about that, Belinda, feel free to do it at any point.
Well,
Show us your
talked to
colorful
Patrick
slides.
last night that I would be willing to do it.
Woohoo!
But I can tell you right now that I'm gaining some confidence with each one of these that I see. So yeah, but I'm always looking for ways to make this material more palatable, sustainable, and certainly something that is reinforcing. So those are all things that we need to get from I'm an old school person. I'm not young by any means and came at this very late in life, but I did it because it's the right thing to do. And there's only one shot you get before you go, and to make a difference in the lives of other people. And I guess to that end, that's the right thing to do. Now, all I need to do is pass the test. I got till 2020, and then they're going to throw me out because I'm not going back to college. So 2022, I have till 2022, and that's it. And I'm done. I'm not going back. I'll just find something else to do.
That's
I better
enough
up my
time.
game
That's
on my
enough time.
slide. I thought it was pretty colorful and had a lot of pictures, examples, and changed everything up. But, man, Todd had stepped up the game a little bit for us all. But
Thanks.
He's just raising the bar, Patrick.
I see that. Man.
Oh.
Well, I appreciate y'all coming and supporting Todd, and hopefully we'll see y'all next week to support Miss Belinda. I can't tell you off the top of my head what the topic is.
That was a very quick stab. I did catch that. I didn't realize I made such a quick commitment.
Well, I'll throw you in real fast. You'll have to if you don't want to. I was just throwing you in the water.
I'm all